Once upon a time in the Alps. Long ago, deep within the majestic Alps of southern Germany, where vast pine forests embraced snow-covered valleys and the cold wind whispered like the voices of ancient spirits, there lay a small village named Oberdorf, nestled beside the Eisbach stream. There, amidst the deep woods and under the dazzling full-moon nights, a miraculous tale was born, a story of a kind-hearted young hunter, the gratitude of a mysterious silver fox, and a sacred vow to the Walgeist, the immortal spirit of the forest. Listen closely, for within the rustling leaves and the shimmering light upon the snow, the fates of man and nature intertwined, leaving behind a legend that would echo for eternity. The village of Oberdorf and the life of Hans. Once upon a time, in the Tyrol region of the southern German Alps, where endless pine forests enveloped deep valleys, there was a small village named Oberdorf, nestled beside the Eisbach stream, which froze over in winter. The village was home to only about 20 families, living in low wooden houses with slate roofs to withstand the heavy snow. The villagers survived by growing barley, raising dairy cows, and trading with larger towns like Innsbruck or München whenever the weather allowed. On the northern hillside of the village, a short distance away, stood the wooden cabin of Hans Gruber, a 24-year-old man with tousled brown hair and deep blue eyes. His father, a skilled hunter, had passed away 6 years ago from malaria, leaving Hans an oak bough and a dagger engraved with the head of a stag. His mother had died when he was still a child, so Hans grew up in solitude, with only the forest as his companion. His cabin was simple: rough pine walls, a thatched roof secured with rope, a straw bed, a clay fireplace, and a few animal hides hanging from the rafters, the meager spoils of his occasional hunts. Hans was unlike old Conrad, a rugged village hunter who often boasted about his homemade iron traps and the time he had slain a brown bear to sell its pelt to traders. Hans only hunted enough to survive, 1 deer per month, trading its meat and hide for black bread, cheese, or a jug of barley wine from Hilda, the village market vendor. He often told her, "The forest is our mother, we must not exploit it." One of Hans's closest friends was Elsa, Hilda's 19-year-old daughter. Elsa had golden braids, rosy cheeks from the cold, and a straightforward personality. She often teased Hans whenever he brought rabbit pelts to trade. "If you hunt this little, how will you ever get rich, Hans? Or are you planning to marry the entire forest?" Hans would only smile gently and reply, "If the forest were my wife, at least it wouldn't nag like you." The fateful encounter. On a December evening, as snow began to fall thickly and the wind from Zugspitze Peak swept through the forest, Hans donned his tattered goatskin cloak, grabbed his horn lantern, and ventured into the woods to check his net traps. The night was so cold that his breath turned to white mist, and his old leather boots creaked against the snow-covered ground. Suddenly, a faint whimper came from a bush near the Eisbach stream. Hans raised his lantern and before him lay a silver fox, a rare creature in the Alps, its fur shimmering like pure silver, often hunted for noblewomen's cloaks in Salzburg. Its left front paw was caught in a rusty iron trap, the kind only Conrad or poachers from neighboring villages would use. Blood stained the snow, and the fox looked up at Hans, its golden eyes filled with pain but burning with an unspoken plea. He knelt down and whispered, "Don't be afraid, I won't harm you." With his calloused hands, Hans removed the trap, the iron jaws creaking as they opened. He tore a strip of fabric from his cloak, gathered some dry moss from the base of a nearby tree to stop the bleeding, and carefully bandaged the fox's wound. When he let it go, the creature stood still, staring at him for a long moment as if trying to etch the image of its savior into memory before dashing into the forest, leaving behind tiny paw prints in the snow. On his way back, Hans met Elsa, who was carrying firewood from the forest to the village. She looked at him in surprise and asked, "What happened to your cloak? Did you run into a bear?" Hans recounted the story of the silver fox, and Elsa burst into laughter. "You fool! That fur is worth as much as a whole cow." But then, she softened and said, "Still, you're the same Hans I know, soft-hearted like soggy bread." The poacher and the harsh winter. A few days later, Hans heard from old Conrad that a poacher named Marcus had arrived in the area. Marcus was a tall, scar-faced man from distant Bavaria. He carried sharp iron traps and a large crossbow, specializing in hunting rare animals to sell to noblemen. At the Zum Adler Tavern, Conrad boasted to the villagers, "Marcus says he's set traps all over the forest. If we catch the silver fox, we'll share the profit." Hans felt uneasy hearing this but remained silent. That winter was harsher than anyone had seen before. Snow buried the paths leading to the village, the deer retreated deep into the forest, and the cold was so severe that even the village cattle huddled together in their stalls. Hans survived on a few dried potatoes and bits of salted meat, sitting by his fireplace, which was slowly dying out from a lack of firewood. Sometimes Elsa would bring him a loaf of black bread, worrying, "You look thinner, Hans. Stop staying up on the hill, come down and stay with us." But Hans only shook his head and said, "I'm used to being alone." The blizzard and a miraculous rescue. On the eve of St. Nicolaus' feast, a terrible snowstorm struck. The wind howled, shaking the entire forest. Hans was asleep when a thunderous crack echoed through the night. A giant pine tree near his cabin had been uprooted by the storm, crashing down and collapsing his roof. He was buried under a pile of wood and snow, with a heavy beam pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. He shouted for help, but the wind drowned out his voice. The cold seeped through his clothes, and he thought of death. At that moment, the silver fox emerged through the snowstorm, its fur gleaming like molten silver in the darkness. Behind it followed a pack of foxes, about 15 in total, ranging from fiery red to aged gray. The silver fox, standing at the front, let out a soft call, issuing a command. Then, with synchronized effort, the foxes began digging through the snow around Hans. Some pulled at the wooden beams while others pushed away the snow, working together like a small army. After more than an hour, Hans was freed, trembling and exhausted. The foxes gathered around him, using their warm bodies to shield him from the cold. The silver fox picked up a dry pine branch and placed it in front of him. Hans struck his flint, igniting a small fire. A red fox brought him a few wild berries, another dragged over some ginseng roots, while the old gray fox contributed a bundle of dry pine needles to keep the fire burning. Hans ate a few berries, feeling his strength slowly return, and looked at the foxes with deep gratitude. The silver fox's shelter. The silver fox led Hans to a cave hidden behind a large moss-covered boulder, about 7 meters deep, just enough space for him and the foxes. Inside it was warm, with the rock walls blocking out the wind and a thick carpet of pine needles covering the floor. The foxes curled up around Hans, keeping him warm throughout the night, while the silver fox nestled beside him, its golden eyes gleaming with quiet satisfaction. The confrontation with Marcus. The next morning, after the storm had passed, Hans woke up in the cave. The foxes had left, except for the silver fox. Stroking its fur, he murmured, "You saved me, so I will protect you." The fox led him back to his ruined cabin before vanishing into the forest. That afternoon, Hans went down to the village to ask for help rebuilding his hut. Elsa and her mother, Hilda, brought bread and firewood, while a few men from the village, including Johann the carpenter, helped carve new wooden beams. But their brief moment of relief was interrupted when Marcus appeared, crossbow in hand, growling, "I heard you freed this silver fox. It's mine. I set traps for a whole week to catch it." Hans replied coldly, "It belongs to no one. The forest isn't yours." Marcus sneered, "You fool! I'll find it and skin it myself." He turned to leave, but Hans wasn't going to let it end there. That night he tracked Marcus into the forest, carrying his bow and dagger. He found Marcus resetting traps near the cave, the very place where the foxes sheltered. Without hesitation, Hans drew his bow and fired an arrow, striking Marcus' crossbow and snapping it in two. Marcus stumbled back in shock, yelling, "You're insane!" before fleeing toward the village, never daring to return. A new life and a lasting legend. After the incident, Hans rebuilt his hut near the cave and swore never to hunt foxes again. He turned to chopping wood and gathering herbs, living in harmony with the forest. Elsa often visited, bringing him bread and teasing. "So you're friends with the foxes now? Be careful, they might eat all your food." Hans laughed. "If they do, I'll share." The villagers began telling stories about Hans and the silver fox. During the winters, people would see him walking through the snow-covered woods with the silver fox by his side, guiding him as he brought firewood back to the village. Even old Conrad, though jealous, had to admit, "That boy's got some kind of magic." Hilda, meanwhile, told the children in the village that the silver fox was the spirit of the forest, repaying Hans for his kindness. The tale spread far and wide, becoming a legend in Tyrol. The villagers carved an image of Hans and the silver fox onto the gate of Oberdorf's church, with the words, "Gut word belohnt, kindness is rewarded." Every winter, children would gaze toward the forest, hoping to catch a glimpse of Hans and the silver fox under the moonlight, a symbol of compassion and the unbreakable bond between humans and nature. Peace after the storm. After Marcus fled, Hans reinforced his cabin near the cave with pine wood and granite, adding a small porch to shield against rain and snow. Elsa often visited, bringing hot potato soup in a clay pot from Hilda, along with a few loaves of dark bread baked over a charcoal fire, an Oberdorf specialty. One afternoon, as they sat by the fire, Elsa asked, "Are you planning to live with the foxes forever, Hans? You should come to the village and work as a carpenter with Johann. You're quite skilled with your hands." Hans smiled gently. "I prefer the forest, Elsa. It's peaceful here, and the silver fox is my friend." Elsa teased, "If you marry it, make sure the wedding is under the pine tree so I can attend." Their laughter echoed through the mist-covered branches. Hans gradually took up woodcutting and herb gathering, relearning old remedies from his father: wild chamomile for fever, earth ginseng for strength, and peppermint leaves to soothe the throat. He dried them on flat pine planks and traded them at the market for linen, beeswax candles, or a bit of salt from Hilda. The villagers began to notice. Birds seemed to sing louder when Hans passed, and Hilda whispered to Elsa, "There's a strange light from the cave on full moon nights. The forest truly favors that boy." Hans only smiled, but he felt the green stone on his necklace, Frau Alina's gift, warm every time the silver fox was near. Meeting Frau Alina. On a full moon night in early spring, as the snow melted and the first snowdrops bloomed on the hillside, Hans heard light footsteps outside his cabin. He grabbed his lantern and stepped out to see Frau Alina, the mysterious old woman. She wore a silver-gray wool cloak embroidered with oak leaves. Her long white hair flowed like the Eisbach stream, and her pale blue eyes glowed like will-o'-the-wisps over the marsh. In her hand she held an oaken staff carved with spiral symbols, an ancient emblem of spirits in Tyrolean legends, with a translucent gem gleaming at its tip. "You are Hans Gruber, the one who saved the silver fox?" Her voice was deep, like the wind sweeping through the valley. Hans nodded, slightly trembling. "Who are you?" She smiled. "I am Frau Alina, keeper of the Walgeist, the ancient guardian spirit of the Alps. The silver fox is its messenger, carrying the soul of the forest in its golden eyes. You saved it, and now the forest has chosen you as its protector." She handed him a leather necklace with a green gemstone, radiant like jade. "Wear this, and the forest will always be with you. But your destiny is not yet complete. Walgeist will test you one more time." Then she faded into the thick mist, leaving behind the scent of pine and a fleeting chill in the air. Reuniting with the silver fox. The next night, the silver fox appeared outside Hans' cabin, leading 2 tiny fox cubs. Under the moonlight, its fur gleamed like flowing silver, and the gemstone on Hans' necklace shimmered with its breath. He knelt down, placing some cured meat and wild berries on a pine leaf, whispering, "Are you truly a messenger?" The silver fox let out a soft cry, clear and melodic like a small bell, then guided its cubs to the resting place Hans had made from pine leaves and dry branches. The little foxes nibbled at the meat, their small golden eyes filled with curiosity, while their mother watched Hans as if in gratitude. From then on, the silver fox returned every few nights, sometimes bringing an entire pack, more than 20 foxes, from fiery red to old gray ones with drooping ears. Each time, Hans felt warmth from the gemstone, as if the Walgeist was watching through the golden eyes of its messenger. Elsa, upon hearing about Fraulein, was both amazed and skeptical. An ancient woman of the forest? My mother told me those stories as a child, but I always thought they were just tales to scare us. But when she touched the gemstone, an eerie wind swept through, making the nearby pine branches tremble like they were whispering. Elsa shivered. Maybe you're right. This forest is alive. The return of Marcus. Summer arrived, and the pine trees turned lush green when old Conrad came rushing with a warning. Marcus is back, Hans! He brought 3 men from Bavaria, armed with large crossbows and steel-reinforced traps. They swore to take the silver fox's life, and yours. Hans gripped his necklace, feeling the stone heat up as if forewarning him. He refused Elsa and Johann's offer to help. This is between me and the forest. That night, Hans followed the hoofprints to Marcus' camp near the Eisbach stream. Marcus was sharpening his arrows on a whetstone, sneering at his companions. That fox will hang in Munich, and that boy will die by my hand. As Marcus raised his crossbow, the silver fox leapt from the shadows, leading an entire pack of foxes. They surrounded the poachers, growling, causing the horses to rear up and the tents to collapse. Trees trembled, their branches intertwining into a living barrier, cutting off escape. Walgeist emerged from the forest, a towering figure, half man, half tree, its body covered in moss, arms woven from oak branches, eyes shining like falling stars. Its voice echoed. Greedy one, you have defied the forest too many times. Leave, or remain here forever. Terrified, Marcus and his men dropped their weapons and fled. One lagged behind, only to be ensnared by roots and dragged into the darkness, his screams swallowed by the wind. Walgeist turned to Hans. You have overcome your enemy, but your final trial awaits. Prepare yourself. Then it dissolved into the trees, leaving the foxes beside Hans. The final test from Walgeist. Autumn arrived, painting the pine trees golden, and an unusually cold wind swept through Oberdorf one night. As Hans tended his fire, his gemstone burned hot, glowing brightly, casting strange tree-like shadows on the cabin walls. A deep voice echoed in his mind. Hans Gruber, come to the heart of the forest. Your fate awaits you there. Grabbing his dagger, a wooden staff, and a leather pouch of herbs, guided by instinct, he ventured into the forest, the stone's pale green glow lighting his path. After hours of navigating moss-covered trails and dry riverbeds, he reached a hidden clearing unknown to any villager. In the center stood a colossal ancient oak, over 30 meters tall, its gnarled bark carved with ancient symbols, runes of the old Germanic tribes. Its roots twisted like veins of the earth, emanating the scent of damp soil and pine resin. The silver fox was waiting, its golden eyes burning like fire. Suddenly, the ground trembled, and Walgeist emerged from the tree, larger than ever, crowned with withered branches, holding a staff of radiant green light. The final trial by Walgeist. You have protected my messenger, Walgeist spoke, its voice like distant thunder. But the forest must know how far you are willing to sacrifice. Before you stand 2 doors. From the ground, 2 glowing circles appeared. One led back to Oberdorf, where Elsa and the villagers lived in peace. The other led deeper into the forest, where darkness and eerie whispers echoed. Choose, return to humanity, forget me, and live an ordinary life, or step into the shadows, face your greatest fear, and become the forest's eternal guardian. Hans gripped the stone tightly, thinking of Elsa, Frau Hilda, and the nights spent laughing by the fire. But he also remembered the silver fox's cry, the warmth of the foxes huddled against him in the snowstorm. He looked at Walgeist. I do not want to abandon anyone. Is there a way to keep both the village and the forest? Walgeist remained silent. Then the great oak tree glowed, and Frau Alina stepped forth, saying, Your heart does not choose selfishly. Walgeist wanted to see if you would forsake the forest for an easy path. Step into the darkness and prove your devotion. Hans took a deep breath and stepped through the second door. Darkness engulfed him, and suddenly, he stood on the edge of a steep cliff. Below lay an abyss of endless black. Above, a sky filled with raging storms. A shadowy figure emerged, his father, the man who had died of fever. Hans, his father's voice echoed. You fear losing loved ones as you lost me, don't you? The forest demands that you overcome this fear. Hans trembled, recalling the nights he had cried beside his father's bed, helpless as the illness took him away. He shouted, I fear no more! I will protect everything, my village, the forest, and those I love! And with that, he leaped into the abyss, trusting that the stone would guide him. A swirl of blue mist surrounded him, and when he opened his eyes, Hans was back before the oak tree. Walgeist smiled. You have faced your greatest fear, loss. You are now my guardian, the bridge between man and nature. The oak tree shone, engraving an oak-shaped pattern onto the stone. A warm breeze carried seeds across the forest, a promise from Walgeist of new life. The ritual of Walgeist. After the trial, Frau Alina taught Hans an ancient ritual to honor Walgeist, known as Waldsegen, the forest's blessing. Every year, on the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, Hans had to visit the great oak, place a wreath made of pine branches, oak leaves, and snowdrop flowers at its roots, and vow, I shall protect the forest as the forest protects me. In return, Walgeist would bless Oberdorf, trees would grow greener, wild animals would not harm the crops, and the Eisbach stream would never run dry. Hans performed the first ritual that very year, under the watchful eyes of the silver fox and its kin. As he placed the wreath, a warm wind swept through, carrying a distant song, the voice of Frau Alina blending with the rustling leaves. The villagers, though not understanding fully, began calling the winter solstice Nacht der Waldes, Night of the Forest, and children started leaving pine branches at their doors, hoping for the forest's blessing. A new life with the spirit of the forest. Hans told Elsa everything, and she believed him after seeing the oak pattern on the stone. They married the following winter in Oberdorf's church, celebrating with honey bread, red wine, and a small pine wreath Hans made to honor Walgeist. On their wedding night, the silver fox stood atop a hill, and a blue light flickered from the cave, as if offering its blessing. Hans and Elsa built a larger home near the cave, living off woodcutting and herbal medicine. They had 3 children, Lucas, Greta, and Finn. Lucas, their eldest son, was born with the same blue eyes as Hans and had an uncanny ability to hear the wind and predict storms from a young age. When he turned 10, Hans passed the necklace to him, saying, You are my successor. The forest has chosen our family. That night, Frau Alina appeared, teaching Lucas the Waldsegen ritual and how to read the forest signs. 3 calls signified danger. Thick moss growing on the left side of trees indicated the direction of water. The silver fox, now old, still visited, sometimes bringing its descendants, small foxes with shimmering silver fur. Hans believed it was immortal, carrying the spirit of Walgeist within. Lucas' role in the future. When Hans passed away at 60, Lucas, now 25, became the new guardian of the forest. He was as tall as his father but carried his mother Elsa's calm nature. Lucas not only continued the Waldsegen ritual but also expanded it. He carved small wooden tablets shaped like oak trees and placed them around Oberdorf to mark the lands protected by Walgeist. The villagers gradually joined in, bringing pine branches and singing ancient songs about the forest on the winter solstice, turning it into a beloved tradition. One day, while gathering herbs near the great oak, Lucas heard whispers from the stone. Danger approaches from afar. He rushed back to the village and warned them of a group of hunters from Innsbruck planning to burn the forest for land. Lucas led the villagers and a pack of foxes, now led by a new silver fox, to confront the hunters. Under his gaze, Walgeist appeared, shaking the earth and causing trees to grow thick, blocking their escape. The hunters fled, and Lucas carved a new wooden tablet that read, Der Wald schützt uns. The forest protects us. Lucas married a village girl named Marta, a skilled weaver who loved the forest as he did. They had a son named Hans, named after his grandfather, and passed the necklace down through generations, keeping their vow to Walgeist forever. A living legend. Elsa lived to be 75, telling stories by the fireplace. Your grandfather was the bridge between Walgeist and mankind, carrying kindness between the two worlds. The legends spread across Tyrol. Villagers carved images of Hans, the silver fox, and the great oak onto the church gates, inscribing, Gew word belant, der Waldlet. Kindness is rewarded, the forest lives on. On bright moonlit nights, some claim to see the figures of Hans, the silver fox, and Frau Lena in the forest, their presence carried by the wind that whispers with the breath of Waldgeist. Children leave pine branches outside their doors, and by morning, they often find the prints of a silver fox and a small green stone, a gift from the forest. The Nacht der Waldes festival became Oberdorf's symbol, a reminder that kindness and devotion to nature would live on, like the ancient oak standing deep in the heart of the forest.